Where's
Right.
Christy? Oh,
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Salt Lake City School District Board of Education meeting. Today is July 9th, 2024. Just jumping into a few quick recognitions for tonight. As always, I want to recognize our association presidents. For classified association presidents, buildings and grounds, we have President Leo Campo. Child nutrition, President Tanya Slaughter. Transportation, President Chris Krogh. For the Salt Lake Education Association, we have President James Tobler, who I think is represented by Mike and Chelsea tonight. Perfect. And then for the Salt Lake Association of School Administrators, President Bree De Leon. I also do want to recognize that Board Member Christy Sweat and Superintendent Grant are participating remotely this evening. And with that, we can jump into the Pledge of Allegiance, who will be led by Bryce.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, sorry, Bryce. Thanks, Bryce, for leading us in the pledge. Up next, we have our consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion from the board regarding the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as listed.
All right. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Okay, sorry. Okay, any discussion?
yes.
Board Member Anderson and then Jensen.
I just wanted to say
I
again.
don't think your mic's
Oh.
working.
Hello. I just wanted to reiterate something I brought up on a few of the consent agendas when we approved the school financial reports. That we've talked about how a lot of those funds, you know, if a school, for instance, receives a small grant and they don't spend the whole thing down and there's $200 in there, that in some cases that $200 is staying in there for, you know, more than 15 years, and that we really want to encourage people to spend that money on students. And our business administrator, Alan, has given a lot of clear direction, as has others in finance in the meeting, about how that can be rolled into discretionary money. And I did a little bit of a comparison between the first school financial report that I approved on consent and the current one we're approving today. And only 10 of our 27 elementary schools show evidence of long-term spending. That's only 37% of our schools. And the average spending is only $11,000 with discretionary budgets as high as $82,000. And we have some schools that have spent as little as $1,000 in the past year on students. So I really think that when we have student spending that's not going anywhere, and it's not being rolled over discretionary, that is really something we need to look at, because the money should be going to the kids who go to these schools.
Thank you, Ashley. Board Member Jensen?
I appreciate your comment, Ashley. I had been looking at that as well and was concerned. There are a number of schools that are around that 82,000. I think there's one that's even 88,000. I also wanted to look at Exhibit 2B1J. That's mobile hotspots, and it's with T-Mobile. I think that at some point we need to have a discussion or a conversation about what is the district's responsibility to provide home internet service. The pandemic is behind us, and when I look at that request, it's $200,000, and to me, $200,000 is significant. I think that that's worth a conversation or a discussion at the board to determine how we want to move forward on those kind of requests. I guess I'm thinking of that also. I know this was a month ago, but I had another request about the student laptops that I think were 2.2 million. I think that all of that together is worth a conversation. What do you think, Mr. Kersley?
Because so much of that's just focused around the one-to-one. So I think, we've been doing one-to-one for 2 years now. I think a board report in a future board meeting about how's it going, what's working, what's maybe not working, how much money are we spending on it would be a valid report for the board.
Thank you. And then this is just a comment on, this would be Exhibit 2B5, reclassification of an assistant manager, and it was custodial. And I don't have any problems when we're, doing a job schedule review, but when you're referring to the different salary schedules in your request, for me as a board member, it would be helpful if you gave a copy of that particular schedule. I went through, I know where the salary schedules are, when we go to the district, but there are, a lot of different schedules, and it just seems like it would be an efficient use of time to just provide that schedule so that you can make the comparison and see, oh, okay, they're moving it from this level to that level.
Thank you, Brian. Any other discussion points? All right, we will start with a roll call vote with Vice President Williams.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Thanks, Christy. All right, that concludes our consent agenda for this evening, and we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda, which is our request to speak. As you know, the board has asked me to read a statement regarding guidelines for speaker public comment. The board enjoys the opportunity to hear from the public during the comment portion of its meetings. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to remind you of our board rules governing your comments. 1, the total time reserved for public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes, with all speakers or groups limited to 3 minutes. The board will not allow public comments during board meetings that are slanderous, obscene, or otherwise violate state or federal law. 3, employees and/or their representatives may not use the public comment period to address issues that should be raised through existing formal communication channels or established grievance or negotiation procedures. I'd also like to explain that unless the speaker's topic is already on the agenda, state law prohibits the board from taking action on items raised during the public comment period. However, if it seems appropriate to the circumstances, I may direct district staff to follow up with the speaker on the topic discussed. Our first speaker this evening is Brianna Taylor.
Good evening, members of the school board. My name is Bree Taylor-Loff. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm here to discuss the planned changes to board policy G24. I have deep concerns about the potential repercussions of these changes, and it occurred to me that many of you may not have ever spoken with someone who utilizes a G24 protection plan. I would like to share my personal experience with this policy to highlight its importance. I've been a teacher in this district since 2015, but I did not come out publicly and begin my transition until 2019. One factor in that timeline was not feeling safe to show up as who I am in the workplace, especially after seeing other colleagues experience discrimination for their LGBTQ+ identities. I have lived on both sides and know what it is like to navigate this district when I was perceived as cisgender compared to now as a transgender individual. I cannot stress enough that not only is a specific policy for transgender and non-binary staff and students deeply needed, but we need even more education, awareness, and support. As a non-binary educator, the original language of policy G24 provided clear and specific support to navigate the hostility and ignorance that transgender and non-binary folks face on a day-to-day basis. I wish I didn't need a safety plan because of who I am, but after facing targeted harassment online, from colleagues and community members, the trust and sense of safety that the specific language of G24 created was crucial. It allowed me to focus on my work and contribute fully to the school community instead of being consumed with the stress and anxiety of wondering if I was safe. I felt reassured that the district recognized and valued my identity, which is something that generic inclusivity language could not have provided as effectively. If the language becomes more generic, I fear that future transgender and non-binary staff and students may face the same uncertainty and hesitation in seeking support. Visibility and acknowledgement are not just abstract concepts. They have real, tangible effects on our daily lives. Seeing my identity explicitly mentioned in policy helped me feel seen and valued, not just as an educator, but as a person. The policy did more than just protect me. It fostered a culture of inclusivity and acceptance that benefits the entire school community. While I understand the need to comply with HB 261, we must advocate for interpretations that allow for specific protections within a broader inclusivity framework. Maintaining the explicit language in Policy G24 demonstrates our district's commitment to leading with integrity and supporting all individuals genuinely. We know as educators that a one-size-fits-all approach is not best practice. We implement differentiation and know the importance of recognizing the individual needs of each student in our classrooms. Salt Lake City School District aims to be the flagship district of our state. To be a district leading the way with integrity, I hope you consider the precedent you set with each of these decisions, because it will influence how other districts approach similar issues where we are called to defend the dignity, safety, and inclusion of communities that need us most. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree.
Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Riley Pickle. Of course it is, yeah.
First.
Hello, board. Good evening. My name is Rai Pickle. My pronouns are they, she, and I am going into my third year as a high school educator in your district. I am proud to work in a district that promotes inclusion and equity. I am especially proud to work for an admin team at my site that supports and accepts me for who I am as a human, while also pushing me to be a better teacher and recognizing me as the teacher that I already am, which is a great one. I'm not here to brag about how incredible my Panther community is, however. In addition to being a proud educator, I'm also a proud non-binary lesbian. The G24 policy allows me to feel safe enough to be the teacher that I needed when I was a student and that our students need now. That is why I feel the need to discuss the impact of what was recently changed in the policy as per your vote. The board reviewed G24 because of HB 261 and ultimately voted to replace the language specific to my community to comply with the law. Language that was purposefully crafted to offer protections for all while intentionally naming those who are at a higher risk of harm. In my opinion, this policy did not promote differential treatment or engage in discriminatory practices as defined by HB 261. However, I understand that I am not a lawyer. Instead, I will focus on what I do know as a language arts teacher: language. The erasure of specific identities from the law has an impact we felt in the history books for decades. I truly believe that we could have had visible language for our students and staff while being in compliance with the law, but we chose not to. While this seems small, as the policy still includes those students even without explicitly naming them, I am worried about what it means for the future of our district. I worry about what else we will choose not to do at the expense of students who are dying at a high rate for a government who does not seem to care that they are dying in the first place. In addition to language, I know a lot about our awesome queer students. My main concern is how this will affect them after the vote a few weeks ago. As a very visibly queer educator, I have the privilege of getting to know these high-risk students in hallways and their extracurriculars, although I may not teach them in my class ever, simply because we share a community in queerness. It is the greatest joy of my job to watch them be out in a high school without shame, where I never could have imagined doing that when I was 17, just 8 years ago. They're incredibly brave and resilient. One of these students just graduated and luckily rid themselves of all their teachers, but was kind enough to agree when I asked if she would let me read her reaction to G24 being changed. I hope that you will take it into consideration when more bills are passed like HB 261, and that the board will listen and always seek out non-binary and trans educators and students like myself and my amazing students before voting on issues that will affect us in the future. She said, quote, "School is already difficult as a trans student. If I didn't have this while I was in school, I wouldn't have made it. Please, please, please protect us." As the non-binary adult that she trusted in a school that loved and accepted her for who she was in our amazing flagship district, I am also begging you, please, please, please protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Riley. That concludes our request to speak portion. We're moving on now to our discussion agenda. The first item is bonding discussion and timeline. Alan, do you want to go ahead and introduce this to us, please?
Yes, we have some guests in the audience to help us with this conversation. We've got Alex Buxton from Zion's Public Finance and Ryan Bjerke from Chapman, and they are our bond attorneys. And we have Kyrene Gibb there from Y2 Analytics that you heard from her the other board meeting. They're here to answer any questions. If you three want to come up to this table, just pull up an extra chair there. Attached to the agenda and also in your handout is this calendar of things that need to happen between now and November bond election. And we're going to have Alex, since it's on Zion's letterhead, Alex pulls the short straw to kind of go through this and maybe explain what some of these things are and answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Do we want to put it up on the screen, or are we just doing this?
It'll be pretty small on the screen.
Okay. All right. I should have brought my reading glasses to read my own print here then. All right. Well, again, my name is Alex Buxton with Zions Bank Public Finance, and appreciate the invitation to meet with you. It's been a few months, so it's great to be back, along with my colleagues here. So we had a draft calendar that Ryan and I kind of went through and nailed down a few dates, and so we can go through these. All of these dates are fit within the legal requirements. Certain things have to be done within a certain timeline, certain range between now and the November 5th election, and so all these dates fit within that. However, we do have some wiggle room, so if we needed to adjust a few days here or there, it certainly can be done. So you want me to just go kind of line by line then, Alan? Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. So, of course, today we're having our meeting to review this. We had a call a couple of weeks ago, and as of right now, we have scheduled August 6th to adopt the election resolution. That has to be adopted within 75 days of the election, or no sooner than 75 days before the election. And so the actual kind of deadline for that would be on August 22nd. But as of right now, we've got it scheduled for August 6th. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of, again, wiggle room so that if something needs to be adjusted or it doesn't happen on August 6th, we still have time to come back to the board before August 22nd to adopt that. That, of course, would mean by that time we'd want to have everything kind of nailed down as far as the amount of bonds that the school district wants to pursue with the election. And so we'd have a part of that resolution that Ryan would put together would also have some ballot proposition language included that would actually be part of that November 5th election. We'd also, after that, have a publication of a notice of public hearing that would need to be posted on the public notice website, and also put in a public location that's reasonably likely to be seen by residents of the district. It used to be we put it in the newspaper. That doesn't get the viewership as it used to, so now the law's been changed where you just have to post it in a location that's reasonably to be seen. September 2nd, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly since there's kind of a lot to cover, but if you have a question, just chime in and one of us can certainly answer that. September 2nd would be the last day that a eligible voter could file a request to the election officer to prepare an argument in favor or against the bond proposition. Several years ago, new legislation came out to require arguments in favor and against the election. And so sometimes we have somebody that files a request to put something as a kind of a argument against the election. Sometimes we don't. We don't have to have one, but that would be the day that they would have to have filed a request, and then September 6th would be the actual deadline to submit the argument against. That same day on September 6th, the board would also submit a argument in favor of the bond proposition. Eligible voters could do that as well, but the board would submit that. I would likely work with Alan to put that together, or a member of the board or superintendent, or we'd kind of work on that together, but we'd need to have that put together, 500 words or less, as you see. September 17th, there'd be a public hearing that we would have already posted that publication of notice of public hearing. That would take place on September 17th, which is a regularly scheduled board meeting, which is why we chose that day. And again, it fits within the legal parameters of the timeline. Between September 23rd and October 21st, we would need to put together and mail out a voter information pamphlet or brochure. And again, it would include a plan of finance, and we can help put that together along with probably staff of the school district, communications staff or marketing staff would help with that as well, so that everybody understands exactly what it is the school district is looking to do with the election. September 23rd is the last day for rebuttals on those prior arguments in favor or against. So kind of a response to those would happen sometime at or before September 23rd. October 1st would be another essentially a public hearing. We call it a public meeting, but that would be when we'd actually present the argument for and possibly against, if there was one. We would have a meeting specific to that and read through those and answer questions. We have to hold that, and it can't be before 6 p.m. So we have that scheduled again during a regularly scheduled board meeting on October 1st. Right around that same time, we would begin the distribution of informational brochures. Again, I mentioned that the timeline is between September 23rd and October 21st, so we're just saying, hey, right by the beginning of October, we ought to have that brochure ready to go that we can disseminate to everybody. All right, next side of the page here, we've got as an optional meeting, a meeting with the Utah Taxpayers Association. That's not a legal requirement, but as we mentioned in our previous discussion a couple of weeks ago, having gone through this many times, our group, I feel like it's always a good idea to get them up to speed on what it is the district's looking at doing. They're going to weigh in on it regardless, so we might as well be proactive, set up a meeting with that group. They appreciate it. We kind of, we can invite whoever wants to be there, and we just let them know exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. And usually that is helpful when it comes time for them to decide kind of where they stand. And so I recommend that we set up a time to meet with them, but we do want to have everything lined up and we know exactly what we're doing before we meet with the Taxpayers Association. Also in the beginning of October, we would post the arguments and the rebuttal arguments on the voter information website and the board's website. And so, in the district's newsletter or other periodical, if applicable, so we can kind of determine where we're going to post all that. But we want to make sure, once again, it's about getting the word out and being very transparent to the voters and giving them all the information that they need to make their decision. October 10th, we'd post a notice of bond election. And once again, on the notice, public notice website, in a public location, reasonably likely to be seen. And so everybody knows that on November 5th, Salt Lake School District is having an election. Then, of course, on November 5th would be the election day. And a couple of weeks after that, the board has a meeting scheduled on November 19th, and that would be the last day, essentially, to canvass the results of the election. So we talked about that being the likely day that we would canvass the results. Now, there are other things that can be added to this calendar. This is mostly outside of that Taxpayers Association meeting. This is mostly just what's required from a legal perspective. Certainly, we always recommend, public open houses, whether it be at the high schools or putting together, fact sheets and having those available. You can have more meetings if you want, like I say, public open houses and things like that. But this is kind of the minimum requirement that we'd have to follow. And we've got this guy here to make sure that we follow everything to the T, right, Ryan?
Exactly.
Okay. So, with that said, if there's any questions on what I've gone over, happy to answer those. If either of you feel like I've skipped something or need to expound on something more, please chime in. But I turn it back over to you, Alan.
Yeah, so I think the big thing to note is that August 6th date, which will basically be when the board approves that, yeah, we're gonna go out for bond. So we'll be working with this team to create, one or a couple different bonding scenarios that the board will approve. One of those on the August 6th meeting that approves the bond language as we move forward. And once that happens, then both the district and the board's role changes. And so I want Ryan to kind of address from then, as board members, what can you do and what can you not do? Do you want to hand the mic to Brian?
Sure.
So once you've decided to go forward with a ballot proposition or a bond election, then as Alan says, your role kind of changes because right now you're kind of discussing what you want to do, what's good, what's bad, everything. At that point, you become subject to the Political Activities of Public Entities Act. And so you have to be careful in what you do. I'm going to tell you the no's right now really fast, and then we'll kind of talk about some other things. First off, the issuer or the board and the district can't expend public funds to advocate for the bond proposition. Okay? So that can get really technical. You don't want anything used. You don't want to come in and make copies on the district's machines and go out and use that. Anything like that you can't be doing to advocate. You can give facts, but you cannot advocate. The other thing that you really don't want to ever do is use your district or board email, okay, to advocate. So violation of the expenditures of public funds is a Class B misdemeanor, and it's on an individual basis. Okay? And the email violation, I think, is up to a $250 fine for each instance, but not to each addressee, if that makes sense. Okay? So generally what we would encourage you to do is anytime you're acting in your in your capacity as a board member, that you be factual and neutral and not advocating one way or the other. Okay? Any meetings, any public forums that you have, these open houses that you do, you can give out facts, you can respond to questions with facts, but it should not be vote for or vote against. Now you could say, we encourage you to make your views known and get out and vote, but not telling them how to vote. Okay? All of this is when you're acting in your board capacity as representatives of the board or of the district. Okay? No expenditures of public funds, no emails. Biggest thing to be aware of is, I'm guessing, you often have constituents who email you with your board email address. And they may ask you questions about that, and your natural inclination is going to be to hit reply, and you may have something in there that advocates. So you're really going to have to be careful with that. And it could be that at some point you may feel like, I'm going to switch to my personal email account. Okay? If you're not acting in your board capacity, if you're acting as a private citizen, you have your free speech rights. But that needs to be made clear. That also deals with websites. If you have a kind of a sub-page on the board or the district website, you can't advocate there, but if you have a separate private website, there's more freedom there. So there are exceptions in here that are discussed. There are some very particular details about when you can and can't provide a link as a district or a board that I'm not going to necessarily get into. We can discuss that later if you want, but those are the highlights for you as board members on what you need to be focused in on and what you can and can't do once you've decided to go forward with that election. Any questions? Yes.
So when you talk about using funds, when we have these open houses, I mean, there's expense to having an open house, the janitorial services, all of that sort of stuff.
So you're going to be keeping those open houses factual and not advocating.
Okay,
So as long as you're not
as long as you're not advocating, you can have.
You can have those.
Okay.
The board and the district can actually go out and gather facts and information using funds. Okay, but as long as you don't turn that into advocacy, you're okay. That information can be provided to others who may use it in that role, but you can't as a board.
Yeah, so I would just add, when we talked about like the voter information brochure that gets sent out to everybody, the district helps put that together. We'll probably print it out on district paper and use district funds to create it, but we'll make sure that it's a very neutral, factual only information brochure. Nowhere will it say vote yes. It'll say vote. And it'll say, here's the need, here's the solution to the need, and here's the cost. You guys decide, right? And so we make sure that as we put all that information together, if we put a factual sheet together, a lot of districts like to just have like a one-page, what's a bond, what's the tax impact, what's all that stuff will just be factual. We can use district funds to print it out and to make it, and we just have it at various, keep it at schools or whatever, and people can just grab one. So as long as it's a neutral, like Ryan's talking about, then we're okay. If somebody within the district, like a resident or a school teacher, or I don't know, school teacher, but a private citizen wants to advocate for the bond and put a big vote yes for the bond, that's okay, but they have to pay for it, right? I mean, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because you do, one of the things that we'll probably work with you on is it is nice to put together an election committee that would be made up of some of you, might be made up of some teachers, might be made up some high-profile residents that like to be involved. And so we like to get input, and if another group wants to advocate for it, or another group wants to spend money to say vote no, Ryan can talk to that, but essentially that's okay, as long as it's not you guys that are using the funds, or your funds. So do you want to talk about that?
Well, just maybe a slight addition to that is, and likely not on your site. So if with Alex's example of a teacher, if they want to support it, that's great at their home or something, but probably not in their classroom.
Not a banner in the auditorium?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So that would be kind of the only caveat to that. Any other questions?
I have a question, but it's really for probably Alan, which is how would we communicate that out to teachers, principals, et cetera, right? Because the things you're talking about that would apply to us would apply to anyone who uses a district email. So we wouldn't want a teacher to, send out a mass message one way or the other.
Yeah. Again, so last time the district bonded was in 1999. So none of us have done this before. But we will, I'm sure, send out communications district-wide to all employees, kind of laying out the do's and the don'ts so they're aware of that. Because we don't want things to fall apart because somebody didn't follow the rules.
And to follow up on Ashley's question, are things like templated responses or emails ever suggested or recommended to employees or elected officials who are participating in this as to not accidentally advocate for something one way or the other?
I haven't necessarily seen that or had that come up. And that might be, yeah, it might be a good thing to have. But again, it's probably just for your district employees. You wouldn't have to do necessarily outside elected officials.
I was thinking about us as elected officials.
Yeah, you as an elected officials, yeah, I mean, it could be.
Okay.
Or it could just be the guidelines of, a simple thing of don't use your district email address or don't use your district or email as you're responding. Don't put your opinions within your schoolroom office, on district sites. You don't necessarily have to say, this is how you have to respond.
But I think we want to make sure that everybody understands too, and with teachers and school district employees that would like to see this bond pass, if their neighbor comes over and says, hey, what do you think about this? They can express their opinion, absolutely. So it's just a matter of, I think, again, the email, in what forum are you expressing your opinion? Are you, where are you when you're doing it? If you're at church and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, what do you think about this? If you're in favor, you can talk about that. If you don't like it, you can talk. So it's not telling anybody that's involved with the district, hey, you can't say anything. I just want to make sure that's clear, because at the end of the day, teachers and employees of the district and of course parents and things, those are the folks that really help pass an election if an election passes. Without that support, it's very hard to pass an election. Board member support as well. So anyway, we don't want to scare anybody off to share their opinions on the bond.
Just
Brian?
to clarify again, this is after a resolution has been passed. So you don't have to worry about your emails right now. And you don't have to worry about a teacher sending a rogue email right now. There's time to get all of this in place and make sure that those guidelines and restrictions are made clear.
Brian?
Thank you for that explanation, Alan, because I was sitting here thinking, okay, a month ago we had a presentation from Y2 Analytics, and you were, one of the reasons you have been retained, well, not one, the reason you have been retained is to help us be successful in bonding this. We can see that there's a need for 2 new high schools. And in that, you were making suggestions of things to do to accomplish, a bond passage.
Navigating
okay. So you're working with Chapman or whatever to make sure that we're not violating any regulations.
I will work very closely with Ryan to make sure that I'm not recommending anything that's illegal. Absolutely.
And we will work very closely with Ryan to make sure we don't send anything out that's illegal.
I have a question.
Ashley?
You mentioned that the newspaper is not the most common way that it's reasonably seen anymore. What is the most common way that notices are most reasonably seen?
Well, of course, the Utah Notice public website is a must. Your own website. You know, putting something up on a door, like the front door of the building here. What other public places?
Schools,
Can we recommend? High schools,
grocery stores sometimes
Yeah.
have the little community
Yeah.
Libraries.
bulletins, libraries.
And, yeah, libraries, I mean, again, whether it's the voter information pamphlet that we make extras and we place those strategically. At the end of the day, I think the goal, again, is just to do the best job possible to get the word out. We don't want anybody to go to the polls on November 5th and say, whoa, what's this? Then we haven't done our job as a district, as a election committee, and so you get the word out, you get the facts out there, you talk about the need that essentially you have. The solution is the bond, the cost of the bond. You very transparent. This is what's going to cost everybody, and then you trust the voters to make the right decision, really. So, but yeah, the more we can get the word out in placing brochures, one-page sheets at the schools, and again, we just run them by this guy to make sure he agrees that they're neutral and that they're just factual and that they're not trying to sway one way or the other. We're just saying, here it is, and you guys decide. But and then you just trust the voters.
And just to that point, I think a lot of people have struggled since the change to where to actually post these. And this language is a little bit more forgiving than it was before. But you can obviously do more than is legally required. So if you feel like, hey, we still want to put it in the newspaper, you can. It's just not a legal obligation. The one thing that I would just mention on this is, so they created the Class A notice requirements recently, and that's what this is. This is a Class A notice. And so really it should be wherever you have been posting your Class A notices, that would be the place to continue to do it.
Ryan, can you give us a sense of what consequences or outcomes there could be if these laws are violated?
Yeah, I was going to kind of follow up because there was some concern that maybe you might affect the election. And no, in general, unless there's sort of outrageous behavior on your part, it should not affect the outcome of an otherwise authorized election. Usually what it would be is, as I mentioned, it's a Class B misdemeanor if you've got the expenditure of funds that you shouldn't have had, or the $250 fine. And this has not been in place for a long time, and there's not a lot of case law about some of these things. I'm guessing as you get down to some of the, teachers and some of the staff that's not as involved as you are, that there may be some more leniency in those circumstances than for those who are actually more of the public official side. So.
I will say there was a district, I won't name, and I wasn't part of the bond election, but recently there was a district that had a very slim margin of passing, like very slim. And it was thought by many that the information they were distributing was in favor of. And at the end of the day, nothing happened. I suppose if anybody was super, outrageously angry that they used district funds to essentially kind of sway the vote to a yes, it could have gone to court and those kind of things, but it never did. I think that district might have been sweating it for a couple weeks perhaps, but at the end of the day, nothing happened. Their election did pass by a narrow margin, and they built the schools. So that's the only time I can think of recently that has come up, and it was like, wow, that was a little bit, didn't seem to be as neutral as it maybe should have been, but anyway.
Question, yeah. So public spaces, so could a district, for example, have banners like, let's say at a corner of Liberty Park. You know, traffic is heavy out there. Is that okay, or is it not?
If the banner was, bond election, get out and vote,
Mhm.
yeah, you're fine. I've seen
Yeah.
districts do that quite a few times of, you might even see it on the school site itself where it's just, remember to vote.
Okay.
Something
That's
neutral
good.
like that. Yes, you can do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Brian?
So how does this relate to like city council members or something like that? Because there are councilmen or councilwomen that, those high schools are in their area and they may really see that there is this need for a high school, or what can they say? Is this something that has to be relayed through us to them, or I don't want it to be that we haven't given notice to, all of the impacted individuals. Is that our responsibility?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't actually had that question come up of, does this apply to somebody trying to influence an election that is not their own election?
Yeah.
If they were to use their city email address. There is an exception for elected officials that may come into play there. But no, it's not your responsibility. It's their obligation to comply with the act themselves. We're just trying to educate you, since you'll be the issuer of the bonds, and the spotlight will truly be on you.
Yeah, as the issuers of the bonds in the public eye, it is important that you stay neutral and abide by the laws here. It's also important to, between now and the time you decide whether or not to put a bond on the ballot, to be reaching out to those other elected officials whose jurisdictions overlap with yours, because they do have outsized influence on their voters. And it is not unprecedented for other governing entities, elected officials, to have a really negative impact on a bond election if they choose to come out in opposition. So I would strongly recommend communicating with Salt Lake City Council members sooner rather than later about the needs of the district, the potential solution here, and the course of action ahead, just to make sure that you're identifying allies early on and doing your best to sideline potential opponents.
You can see where I was going.
Absolutely, yes.
I was going to say the same thing. We talked about the election committee. I mean, the city council members, those are those high-profile residents and taxpayers and voters that I was talking about. So just from a personal opinion, 100%, those are the folks you want on your side, and those are the ones you want advocating with their own money. Or, not as members, not as part of the school district, but advocating for yes votes, because those are the ones, oftentimes that make a big difference in getting something passed.
Any other questions?
I do have
Please.
one. Okay, so I appreciated how you gave this legend at the bottom of your
What did I miss?
well, no,
we got an
I
error
just want
here?
to make sure that I understand the legend,
Yeah,
because
I know.
it's showing, different responsibilities, and of course I key in on, okay, what's mine? Or so over on those dates, over in the right hand, I guess you'd call it a column, you give like BA, okay, that's the business administrator. I mean, this is going to be part of his job or whatever. But then there will be times when it says municipal advisor, okay, that's Zions Bank or whatever, but then it says SB, so that's me and my colleagues. SB is also the superintendent. Should that be
No,
SD?
that's a typo.
Okay, so
We ought to drop the B and just have her an S.
Okay, have her in it. Okay, just wanted to make sure I
So
understood.
that's
Okay.
good, yep.
And then over on Friday, October 4th, it says, by this date, we're going to post these arguments and rebuttal and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And CC it's their responsibility. Are we talking about EC? Is that the election? Who is that? Whose job is? Oh, that's you. That's Chapman.
Chapman
Oh,
and
okay.
Cutler.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so this,
We'll work with
this
Alan.
this guy is BC and CC. How's that? Bond
Okay,
counsel,
okay.
AKA
All
Chapman
right.
and Cutler, so,
Okay.
good. I appreciate you looking at this in fine detail.
Okay.
So not everybody would catch that, so no, that's great. Yep.
So before we're done with the conversation, the other part of the discussion is dollar amount. So Sam, if you could pull up this PowerPoint. So between now and our next board meeting in August, we'll need to kind of narrow this down. Well, it's actually pretty narrow at the beginning, but we'll need to finalize it. So Isaac and I met with the architects. So the architects that would be designing the two high schools are the same architects that we hired to do the feasibility studies. In that RFP process, it was written that whoever wins the feasibility study would also be the architects to design the building. So the architects are already selected for these projects. We've been, since the beginning, using about a $300 million per school number. Using in the feasibility study, it had different options. Using I don't remember the exact term, the recommended option from them, usually lowest price and least disruptive to the student learning environment. So these prices are built on those recommendations. We're still looking at $300 million for each school. So that's total cost, architectural, construction, utilities, and whatever. In addition, as I think we rebuild East and West, or if we rebuild West and Highland, we also would like the students up at East High School to have a similar, athletic facility as the two new high schools. So there's equity amongst the three. So that's why we put on here an East High Field House at an estimated of $40 million. Other things we could bond for. So as we're looking at the construction, as we look at sustainability, if for West High School we wanted to add solar to that project, that's another $2.5 million. Solar for Highland, another 2.5, and then ground source heat pumps. So that's instead of using natural gas boilers, using ground source heat pumps. For Highland, notice West isn't on there because as we did a study, West, the land around West isn't conducive to ground source heat pumps. So that's another $3 million. So those are some sustainability things we could add to the bond, which would then add to those projects. And other sustainability projects, as we have that goal for the board, we can add either new or expansion solar to the following: the auxiliary service building, Indian Hills, Backman, Highland Park, Horizonte, Mountain View, Whittier, Bonneville, Bryant, Glendale, Washington, Clayton, Northwest, North Star. There's also the hybrid electrification. So one of the first, in phase one, we did full electrification at Uinta and a hybrid electrification at Backman. And through that experience, we determined that the additional cost for a full electrification really isn't worth what you get out of it. So we would recommend hybrid electrifications as similar to Backman, which have kind of some backup gas boilers for hitting those peak times. So all these are an estimated cost of an additional $80 million, and that's to meet those goals of the sustainability goals of the board. So summary, I kind of put this out as the top three, the $640 million, those are kind of the non-negotiables. Those are the things that we need to do. Then the sustainability projects are, how does the board feel as we work towards those goals, or do we want to revisit those goals? I mean, if we're going to meet those deadlines that are in the sustainability resolution, thank you. This will this will almost be a must in order to meet those deadlines, or do we want to revisit those deadlines?
I got a question for you, Alan, and maybe more for Ms. Gibb, I believe, from Y2. Do you think that some of these additional projects or recommendations would, like sway the results that you found in the initial surveys that you did?
So in the $750 million bond proposal that was tested in the survey and the focus groups, we included those sustainability projects and I believe the field house at East High as well.
Yeah.
So all of that was covered in that $750 million proposal that was presented to voters. There were some dissenting opinions about the need for a field house and whether that was an appropriate use of public funds.
Okay.
But the sustainability projects to improve efficiency throughout the district was something that voters really rallied behind. So I would say the only piece here that would give me pause from a voter perspective would be that field house. However, to Alan's point, I think to alienate those voters in the district who are loyal to East High would be a mistake as well. So it's a fine line to tread, but I don't think that anything on this list is an immediate red flag.
Okay, thank you. Ashley?
I have a question for Alan, which is, if you're looking at the district sustainability projects and you're looking at the cost, one of the things we saw in this survey is kind of not an outlier, but one of the more qualitative notes was about some of the elementary schools that are older and potentially needing to rebuild those. If you look at the sustainability amounts and know that we didn't test for elementary schools, could you explain for people who are listening how something like bonding also allows us to replenish cash reserves, which is how elementary schools have been rebuilt in the past?
Right, so we have our capital tax levy, which keeps coming in, and what a bond does is means, okay, we don't have to use that levy for these projects. We get this other source. So as we continue year after year to get the tax levy in, and we can reserve those cash reserves, which is what we've done for the last couple elementaries we've built, is we haven't bonded for them, we've used cash reserves. So we build that up so that when it's time to replace a school, we use our cash reserves for those buildings.
And then as a follow-up to that, I mean, what you're saying is the Edison and Meadowlark were built with cash reserves, right?
Yes.
Those are the last two elementary schools.
Correct.
And then also that we, if I'm right about this, we did a feasibility study for all of these things. We know the cost of sustainability from McKinstry. We know the cost of the high school rebuilds because we worked with the architectural firms, but we don't know what the cost would be of an elementary school, so we couldn't sufficiently have tested that in the same way.
Right, and part two, because we don't have any elementary schools that are on our kind of 10-year plan for a rebuild because they still have plenty of useful life. But as we look at our, beyond that, that's when we look at those cash reserves. If we had to use cash reserves for these high schools at $300 million apiece, we'd be like 50 years just to build up the reserves to build one of them. So all those other projects wouldn't be able to happen because all of our money would go to these, which is why bonding is so important here, to offset the cash drain from our reserves to a bond, and then we can use our reserves for the remaining capital projects, which will come up over the several years.
And which would eventually include, obviously, elementary and or middle school.
Yep, I mean, every building we have has an end of life.
Right.
So our plan is build those reserves so when those buildings are end of life, we don't have to bond for every building that we're doing between now and 50 years from now.
And I do actually have one more question for you while I'm thinking about it, which is part of the agenda item here talks about looking at architectural plans. Can you explain how we would move forward with paying for architectural plans if a bond resolution was approved by us and then ultimately not successful?
Right, so what we're asking is some preliminaries so that we approve a PO in the next board so the architects can start doing some preliminary work. Now, whether a bond passes in November or not, we still have these capital needs. So again, because they're not, we wouldn't be doing full-blown design until we know whether election passes, but it's kind of decide, okay, how many gyms do we want in a high school? How many classrooms approximately? What's the square footage? And as we look at our number of students that are projected, what are these buildings really going to look like? And the architects can start figuring that out and designing, so we have a better idea of what that building actually looks like. And that'll give them a head start, so if a bond passes in November, then they really get into the design phase and hopefully get the bid package out, you know, in 9 months to 12 months after the bond election, so we can, you know, because each year that passes is an inflationary increase. So it's really to lay some groundwork so that they can really hit the ground running if a bond election passes in November.
Thank you.
All right, Alan, thank you for the discussion. So it's, oh, Brian, go for it.
So in your estimate, you've included 300 million for West High and 300 million for Highland High. I don't have those different options in front of me, and I mean, it was several months ago, but I'm remembering that there were several options that were more than 300 million. So do we really think that we can get the high school built for $300 million?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, some of the trick with West is that'll be a multi-bid phase. So year one, they'll bid like phase one, and it's really the architect's best guess on what's going to happen with inflation. I mean, they have built some inflationary factors into their estimates of $300 million. But it'll be hard to absolutely know until we get the bid packages back. If, let's say, 300 million wasn't enough, we can draw from our cash reserves. There's other methods that districts can borrow money that's not through a bond. If, you know, we had, let's say we were 10 million shy, we could borrow that 10 million through other means that's not a bond. But, you know, the architects are, they're the experts on here, so I'm hoping that 300 million is a good solid number.
Okay, well, I mean, I am too. I just don't want it to be that we get there and we find out, oh my gosh, it's 50 million more or whatever. Are we going to be able to come up with 50 million more from other sources, or,
well,
you know,
and some of that
80
could
million
be too,
more?
all right, let's look at the design. All right, maybe we start cutting some stuff back that brings the cost down. So that there's other revenue sources plus a design to, you know, control costs. We can work with both of those. That a $300 million price, I feels pretty good in the ballpark.
Okay. It just doesn't seem like a good thing to not be able to build it, and then the public's looking and going, we gave you this money and you...
Or have to go for another bond election in a couple of years because we didn't do enough, which is, you know, why we're really wanted the architects to look and say, okay, 300, is this realistic? Is this going to get the job done? And they're still saying, yes, that'll get the job done.
Okay.
Okay, so then just note, so next meeting, I'll work with this team to have, my guess is we might have 2 things to approve, the 728 million you see there or the 640, and we can have that discussion in the next meeting. Like Kyrene said, there was at the 750 million that, I mean, it seemed like the people they surveyed really said, just get it done and get it done right, is kind of the opinion I was getting. So we'll have that discussion in August, and then if the board's amenable, we'll approve a bond resolution going forward. But we will be working with these 3. Again, I was looking at some of the language, some of the articles you can find from when the 1999 bond passed. A lot of rules have changed since then.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, presenters, for being here tonight. Thank you, board, for the good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. One thing I want to mention before I move to item number 2 is that I didn't note that we had 3 other written public comments from folks who weren't able to be here this evening. It is in your folders. Board members, if you'd like to see it, they are all regarding policy G24, and I'll make sure to work with Dr. Grant and Alan that these are attached to our minutes as well. Sorry for that oversight earlier. Item number 2 on our discussion agenda is the 2024-25 Weapon Detection System Staffing Contract. I know we've talked about this at length a number of times, Board, and if there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion to move this to the action agenda.
Discussion?
Please.
So I respect that there's a perception of safety that has been reported by some parents and a smaller share of students and teachers. And I don't want to wish to diminish their experiences, but I do want to make data-driven choices. And it's clear from the articles we've been presented by school leadership and performance, as well as the broader body of literature, that staffing these detectors is not evidence-based. And before we begin the discussion, or as we begin, I wanted to share my frustration that in August of last year, I asked for 2 things if the contract was approved. And one was an update on CSTAG training, which is the evidence-based threat assessment model that this body approved. And for future decisions about this type of contract, to include additional staff, including the SEL office, rather than being made a matter of business administration. And really, in my opinion, neither of those things have occurred. As I reviewed my notes to prepare, it was clear to me that no one at the time objected to those requests, but that after being raised a few times, they wouldn't be undertaken, and nor would my subsequent request to analyze tardies and academic impacts caused by the detectors. So these topics would, in my opinion, have improved our ability to address the needs that are now outlined in this memo, which are exclusive from weapons detectors. And for instance, it was news to me that we've had Pal American contractors patrolling the streets surrounding our schools, something that I still don't understand why it's possible for a private provider to do rather than a school resource officer. We also could have been updated on the recent Safe School Conference, where some of our West High leaders did share their view on why this is effective, but we also could have heard about the data that a vast majority of students in the United States bringing weapons to school do so for their own protection. A separate study presented to us by school leadership and performance also shared that view, cautioning against making decisions around weapons detectors without investigating, quote, stressors unique to the school environment, and to understand how students' decisions to bring weapons are shaped by the school climate. If we'd heard from additional staff, we could have asked ourselves why, in an effort to make school safer, we're failing to consider that we can't close the loop on increasing safety when presented with a competing reality that students are bringing weapons to feel safe. In my opinion, it's an equally large mistake to look at tardies, or to avoid looking at tardies and academic outcomes, which are our primary charge, as is whether the strategy runs against CSTAG, which I think we've already endorsed as a body. The lack of follow-up on these requests makes me uncomfortable, as does the fact that we still lack school safety legislation cost estimates. We've been told we won't have those estimates until much later this year, but our peer boards have been provided estimates up to $20 million in one-time costs and $9 million in annual costs, and I continue to think it's irresponsible of us to review any contract without more comprehensive follow-up on some of these topics.
Thank you, Ashley. Any other discussion? Mohammed?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, you know already my frustration. First, I never wanted to vote for us to approve that. And sad reality, the majority voted and we moved on. And in our last discussion, there were conversations about, the reputation of the fact that if we were to make a decision and then we go back and retract that decision is not good for the image of a district. And to that I say, what's not good is the fact that the thing came at the last minute and placed in our laps and we were required to vote within a very short period of time. Now, yes, it is a lot of money, absolutely. Am I in favor of weapon detectors? Absolutely not, and I'll never be, because those are schools. That's where kids go. That's not an airport. That's not like a private contractor government facility or so. That's like a place where people go to. And I was trying to figure out, what are other things that we have not talked about when it comes to the issue of weapon detectors. So there is an issue of invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy for those students can actually lead into civil liberties issue. So that's one. And we did talk about the discrimination. Yes, we did get data and information, but the reality is the schools are very packed. Thousands of students go in and out of school. And these numbers that we get are not going to be accurate in terms of the reality of what the students are dealing with when they go through those weapon detectors. And the other one is a psychological stress and anxiety. You know, some might say, oh, it's not much, but I'm talking from my own experience as a minority person. When going through weapon detectors, even though you are not carrying anything, there is always this added stress and anxiety whether something is going to beep. That's a system, yes, it is meant to detect weapons, but nevertheless, it has also faults that it can actually, we heard about information that, if you don't reset it, then there is a chance of a weapon going through. And to me, if something has to be reset so we can avoid such thing, there is an issue there. It is very sad. I wish personally that this contractor would have had the audacity to come and sit in front of us here and answer any questions that the public has or questions that the board has before it was just, taken and placed in front of us and we had to vote for it. And if I may add just one last thing, it's about the emotional wellness of our kids. We all know, those of us who have kids already are dealing with so much since COVID. And then we go ahead and we add this stress. I've heard from numerous teachers about how many students walk into the classroom and they are distraught because they had to move the computer, because it went off because of their water bottle or something. Just so many things out there. So I hope we all think about this before we take a vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Bryce?
Yes, I just have a couple of things, and I don't want to repeat what has already been said, but I very much resonate with what Board Member Anderson and Board Member Bade have said. One thing I do want to reiterate and own up to is a year ago when we voted on this contract, I voted in approval of moving forward with a one-year contract with the understanding that we would have some more research, we would have some more data looking into this, and my constituents let me know that that's what they expected, that's what they wanted, and they were very upset. And so as we move forward today, my vote will be based on what constituents have said to me, looking at what data we do have, and the fact that I haven't been convinced that this is the best decision for our district moving forward or for our kids.
Thank you, Bryce. Any other discussion?
Just a question. When we had the principals come last meeting or whenever, we obviously had good experiences in one school and bad experiences in the other. This contract that we're trying to, that we're discussing, it has to be all three schools?
That'd be a question for Alan.
So when we initially were looking into, the weapons detectors, we felt it was best that you don't pick one school and label it as the danger school or the bad school, that it's best that they're in all three of our comprehensive high schools at the same time. Now, if a school chooses to do something with their own funds, then that can be a different discussion. But as far as the district goes, I think that the district's stance is, if we're going to do it, we do it at all three. Now, I do want to clarify that the contract in discussion is the personnel, the staffing. Now, the machines will still be there if there's nobody there to staff them. Schools can maybe figure out something with their current staff, or if they want to use them for specific events, or if there's certain chatter. So the machines will potentially still be there, but there just won't be the staffing to man them on a day-by-day basis.
I see.
Or they can be stored as well, yeah.
Brian?
Well, I appreciated the opportunity that we had to hear from those principals of the 3 high schools. I mean, to me, they are responsible for securing the schools and ensuring that excellence in learning and equity and safety is provided for their students. And the challenge that I have is I would like to have seen more data, but I also rely on what those principals are telling me. And 2 of those principals were specific in saying that they felt like that it had been positive and that it did provide security to the schools. And when the 3rd principal was questioned on that, the 3rd principal didn't want to lose the opportunity of having that and was trying to consider, how to improve it at that school. So when I'm getting that sort of instruction for the safety of the schools under the responsibility of those principals, I can't just dismiss that when those principals are telling me of what their experiences are. So this is a really challenging situation for me. It's challenging also because as I listen to the data that we did receive, and when knives are coming through and people are like, I don't know if you call it gaming the system, testing the system, whatever it is, trying to get the knives through to prove their point. To me, that is a breach of contract. That, okay, representations were made that it would pick up these sort of devices, guns, knives, all of that sort of stuff. So I would like to know if there is any plan on going back and revisiting and saying you did not provide the services that you agreed to provide under your contract. The same goes with the Pal America contract, where at one high school they weren't getting the support that they needed from Pal America.
It's time.
So to me, those contractual agreements with Pal America need to be looked at too, and if you hadn't provided the services that you contracted, we need to address that.
Ashley?
As a follow-up comment, as we talk about hearing from administrators, I do want to point out that one of the studies provided to us by School Leadership and Performance does show that even when unintended consequences and inefficacy of weapons detection are documented, the use of weapons detectors persists because administrators perceive them as effective. And the article goes on to state that administrators are more likely than any other educational group to claim that detection is effective even when they're presented with evidence to the contrary. So I really question why we would be moving forward in the process when the very evidence we were presented calls into question the process that we've had in evaluating efficacy and who we've been able to hear from, as opposed to who we haven't been able to hear from.
No, it is nice to hear from the principals, but the reality is principals are not doing walking every day through those detectors. The reality is, they do not have to pull out their computers and have to, walk through and probably get, checked. That's the reality we are dealing with. I mean, that's for them what they see based on the information. But the reality too is we are the ones who are in direct contact with the community. We are the ones who are in direct contact with the community. The parents reach out to us. The parents really get in touch with us. Teachers, as a matter of fact, get in touch with us. And they are the ones who are in direct contact with the students, and they can see what is happening out there. You know? So there is like so much out there. I mean, there is a violation of the contract, and also there is the issue of turnover of the employees. That actually makes an issue even more, you know, problematic because of inconsistency and instability, and you see new people every time. And also the other problem we've had is like there were some staff members who actually were fired because they did not follow the rules. So we are only going to be adding more coal to the fire over here. The best thing we can do right now is we learn from our old mistakes and we move forward. And that mistake that we made before of us signing a contract and spending, you know, over $1 million of just like taxpayers' money, then, you know, we owe it to these students. Regardless of the data that we get that shows its positivity or so,
It's time.
but let's ask ourselves, what would the students really say at the moment when they're about to walk through that weapon detectors? Because we have not. I stood there at the schools and I talked to the kids when they walked through. And there is not a single student out of those 12 students I talked to that expressed a positive opinion.
Thank you, Mohammed. If there's no further comment or discussion, I'll seek a motion to move item number 2, 2024-25 Weapon Detection System Staffing Contract to the action agenda.
I can make that motion. I move, let me get the wording right, sorry. I move that we take the 24-25 Weapon Detection System Staffing Contract to the action agenda.
All right, if a motion, is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Sika.
Board Member Sika, no.
Ashley Anderson, no.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, no.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
All right, that motion passes. We will revisit this once we get to the action agenda. All right, our third item on the discussion agenda is item number 3, debriefing after board professional development conferences. This was an agenda item that we didn't get to in a previous meeting and discussion at our board retreat, and is one that has come up to board leadership and the superintendent, to the board, as something that's really important as we attend various trainings and conferences, whether that's through USBA, if it's through other organizations like NALEO, or through the National School Board Association. What is our mechanism or structure for bringing back ideas, best practices to the district, to the board table, and so on? And so, Board Member Jensen, this is something that you have brought to us, and if you want to start the conversation, that'd be awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. When I raised this, it seemed to me that when we are attending these different conferences and when we are using taxpayer funds, that we should have a way to report on what we have learned and how we can implement ideas and policies that have been adopted or created in other school districts with success. So my understanding in talking with you, President Salazar, was in this meeting that we would be looking at a way to actually provide a platform where we could share what we've learned. We have had state legislative audits that have occurred, and when they do that, they make suggestions. I also think that it's important for us to find other avenues to help us address what we perceive are the needs in our particular district. And to me, when you attend those different conferences, you gain a perspective or an awareness of tools, policies, mechanisms that should be considered in our district.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I think there's a lot of really different ways that we could do that, number one. And I know in a conversation that Bryce and I had with Dr. Grant, she had talked to a couple of other superintendents who had some recommendations or even a suggestion about how we might go about it based on what they do in their respective districts. And Dr. Grant, I don't know if you want to provide what that example was, or if there's multiple examples that you've gathered since we had that discussion.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. Greetings from Boston here as I attend a conference. I spoke with Rich Nye, the superintendent in Granite, and he shared that his team, they create an Excel spreadsheet sort of document with all of the sessions listed that people attend. You just add on the sessions each day you attended. And those that attended could then explain what they got out of it. Give some notes of things they were attending to in each of the sessions. And it has proved to be a useful document for them as they're trying to share information with each other about what they found striking or interesting to consider for a different district. It also was nice because it shows how many different ideas there are out there and helps the board sort of sort through what might be most important for our district to consider in the future. So I could look at that more and find out some more information on that, but I thought it was a nice way to, in a fairly simple structure, capture a lot of that for everybody. And then those ideas could be later brought up in board meetings as desired.
Brad, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Dr. Grant. I think that it's important for us to remember that as board members, when you look at the handbook, one of the responsibilities that we have accepted is to educate ourselves and to learn how to be the most effective board member. And to me, one of the ways that we do this is by attending those conferences. But if there isn't a way to report, you really haven't accomplished very much. I think that when Dr. Grant is talking about a spreadsheet where you're actually checking in, and because I would think that the taxpayers would also want to know, oh, okay, my representative, he went to this conference, these are the workshops that he attended. I think that that's valuable to have that as a public record, so that I am accountable to my constituents and that they can see that I am earnestly endeavoring to try and find best practices for the Salt Lake City School District. So when you have a reporting system, of course it's reflecting that, but then to me, you take that reporting system one step further and you have some way to evaluate it as a board and decide, oh, it looks like 4 board members or whatever have attended this and they really felt like this is something that merits a conversation with the board, or at least a look to see if this is something that would be beneficial for the Salt Lake City School District.
Thanks, Brian. Any other board members' thoughts on the discussion so far to this point, and potentially, kind of the interface of a spreadsheet that Granite is using, and if that's something that you think would work for us? Bryce?
Yeah, I think I like the idea of the spreadsheet. I think it's a good accountability piece and everything that Brian is saying. One other piece I thought that maybe we could consider is sometimes at those conferences or professional development opportunities, there is a little bit of downtime where we're sitting around and discussing, and maybe that could be a place where we do a little bit of that, and then that could be transported into the spreadsheet for further review or discussion. But I think that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and that makes sense. As long as we're doing it in groups so that we haven't created a
quorum.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts to this topic? Is this something that folks feel comfortable moving forward with? Absolutely. Okay. Brian, is there anything that you'd want to add to a process or a standard like this?
Well, up until now, I have not sent out notes from different workshops that I've attended because I haven't felt like there was a procedure, and I didn't want it to be that I was overstepping and, board members are going, well, what's board member Jensen doing, flooding me with, all of these things. But I think that it would be nice to have the ability to share with your colleagues, oh, hey, you know what, I went to this particular, because when you go to those workshops, a lot of times, there's a PowerPoint or something like that. And to me, the PowerPoint can help another board member look at it and go, oh, you know what, that is something that, I'd like a little bit more information on. So is this something that we can just agree that we go ahead and forward those things to one another, or is there a procedure that you want to have? I mean, for me, there are two or three that I think are really timely. Okay, I'm just going to give you an example, and this isn't, like we need to have a conversation about this or whatever, but in our conference in April, I went to a workshop, and it was called Harnessing the Power of a Citizen's Long-Range Planning Committee. Okay, I think Bryce was at that particular meeting, Alan was at that particular workshop, Superintendent Grant was at that workshop. We sat by each other, but anyway, as we were listening to that, I could see real benefits that could come from implementing that sort of thing. Right now, I mean, we just had a presentation on, bonding. We also had a presentation on weapons detector. Well, if we had a long-range planning committee, that a citizens' long-range planning committee, that would be a way that would help us address concerns that Board Member Anderson and, Board Member Willie and Board Member Page, you all said that your constituents were contacting you about this weapons detector. Well, to me, this could be a tool where, okay, if we have, and I'm not advocating that, okay, this is what we got to do, we got to go set, but it would at least be something worth looking at to see if this is a tool that could help us as we try and address significant issues that impact the community. So to me, that's just an example of, wow, yeah, let's look at that.
I appreciate that, Brian, and that provides a lot of really good context to.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Not only to this piece, and I would say feel free to send your learnings or your attachments, from those experiences onto the board, but just make sure that you BCC everybody so
Right.
we don't create that quorum virtually as well. So, but I don't know. And Dr. Grant, did I guess former superintendent and I now give you any
That's right.
insights on how that spreadsheet interfaces with board meetings and the public discussion?
Oh, I'm sure it was similar to what Board Member Jensen is mentioning, but I can follow up and learn some more about that. I think it was less of an accountability tool and more of an information sharing tool. so that just the board could communicate with each other in a way that was simple. But I'll check on that and find out more about how they manage and facilitate that and bring that to the group.
Well, I think it'd be good to get a process like this set up and make sure that it's vetted, so that we're not creating a public meeting on a spreadsheet as well, and just verify that. But I think it'd be good to come back, Dr. Grant and Alan and Bryce and I can come back and maybe present something in a future board meeting about what this could look like, and certainly prior to our next professional development opportunities that we have coming up next year.
Thank you. I really appreciate having this discussion. I think it's valuable.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Jensen, for bringing it to us. Well, with that, that'll move us to our action agenda. As you know, we have one item on here, the 2024-25 Weapon Detection System Staffing Contract. I'll seek a motion to approve or not to approve that particular item.
Can we discuss it a little more? Or
Once we've made the motion.
Once we made the motion, okay.
Okay, I will make the motion to approve the (2024-25) Weapon Detection System Staffing Contract.
We have a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Christy. Any discussion? Now we're open to more discussion. Thomas?
Okay. Okay. It's interesting. If you look in this room here, the 3 board members with kids at school have voted no. So put yourself in the shoe of that parent whose kids go through those weapon detectors and they come back to you and tell you about it. It's not once, not twice, not 3 times. My kids have expressed actually an utter frustration with having those systems in there. Because what a system right now is detecting, let's be realistic, those things have been going through the school for years and years and years. The important thing for our schools to be really safe is for us to actually invest that $1 million plus. We can take that and invest it in a way that we can have our schools be a small village where everyone can watch for each other. That's what we need to do. Now, if you have your vehicle, if you drive in it and there is an engine light on, are you just going to ignore that? Just like these lights. Yeah, so if the engine light is on in your vehicle, you're going to make sure you take it to the mechanic and make sure it's taken care of. Is that right? Because you know it's unsafe for you to drive that vehicle. And right now, every one of us here had that red light on. Something is missing, something is not right, that is actually making us question even a little bit about this contract or this system. Now, each one of us here, and I beg of you, those without kids at schools right now, please think about that engine light on. If you have like a bit of a doubt or a question that something is not right, please listen to that, because let's do it for the kids.
You can go first if you want.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify the vote for no. It's not necessarily my feelings on it after the principals came with their data and their experiences through it. I just felt that there was a bit of an inconsistency throughout it. And so my thought process, that's the reason of my question is, well, is there a possibility for schools, because of course West High had an awesome experience, right? At least the staffing did, administration. They claim that it helped. It helped them, and so like, why can't the schools itself choose whether if they want the staffing or not? Because my vote is not for the detectors, because I have people who actually are okay with the detectors. They claim that it helped them, but also at the same time, I have a lot of students who, you know, eventually they just go with the motions. They were disturbed. You know, your usual complaints of delay, getting into classes, all of that stuff. It wasn't necessarily the stress factor that Mohammed's talking about, but my vote of no was because of the inconsistency throughout. I'm not going to put out this XX amount of money for the staffing to be inconsistent and only consistent in one area. I don't think that's wise. So.
Thank you, Jay. Ashley?
So first, I want to acknowledge that it's obviously heavy to discuss school safety, as guns are the current leading cause of death for children and teens. At the same time that gun violence is prevalent, there's also no evidence concluding that anything other than gun control will prevent deaths. Specifically in the western United States, where suicides make up the largest share of adolescent deaths, and extreme risk protection orders would be the most effective strategy to help our students. The American Academy of Pediatrics has identified numerous state contributors to the death rate, including legislation about firearm access, suicide prevention, and firearm safety measures, and noticeably absent is weapons detection. With all the bluster around guns, you'll be hard-pressed to find any evidence that weapons detection works, with the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Education finding that hardening measures like detectors do not meaningfully reduce risks to our children when compared to threat assessment, remodeling buildings, and updating door locks. As I stated in our August 15th meeting last year, it's my opinion that our district decisions should follow the evidence. But I didn't only look at my own research, I asked staff to produce items that they felt could guide our decision making. Only one article concluded that weapons detection can work, but stated, the effectiveness of detectors to achieve their operational aims depends on the training of school personnel, the overall state of building security, e.g. unlocked or unsupervised doors or windows, and the consistency of implementation. It also means that all students must be searched with no exceptions made. None of these elements are met in our current strategy due to the turnover from private contractors, the age of our buildings, the limitations of our cameras, and the lack of follow-up searches reported in the qualitative sections of the district survey we were presented. Combined with ongoing analysis of the remaining literature from school leadership I referenced earlier, as well as literature from the school shooting database, which identifies that bottlenecking single entrances is a risk factor for gun violence, I can't support the detectors on an ongoing basis, and I would ask how we can vote for something when the evidence we were presented and the publicly available data suggests we should use these funds differently. More and more, our national peers are phasing out Evolve due to litigation after student injury and violent incidents, but we're being asked to continue. Why? Perhaps it's because the latest memo asks us to contract with Pal American for additional kinds of safety support. And I would argue this continues to be in part because the city has been unable to supply the number of school resource officers outlined in our MOU to do this work. Just as I did last August, I'd ask why we're not working on that MOU and ongoing strategies for our other needs, particularly with the looming legislative mandate unfunded to the tune of about $30 million. I think if that's what we need, and if those are the safety measures that we really need to look at, or if any board members have questions about the ongoing nature of the contract, we should revisit this discussion in good faith to not be about weapons detection, but about the other authentic safety needs of our school. I think we should stop throwing good money after bad and get to work on those problems.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote starting with Board Member Bade.
Mohammed, no.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, no.
Jenny Sika, no.
Ashley Anderson, no.
Nate Salazar, yes. That motion fails. and I think we'll have to work with Alan to figure out what our next steps might be. But thank you for the discussion. I know it wasn't an easy one to have throughout the course of the last few months. But again, just with other similar and more, difficult conversations that we've had, I appreciate. I appreciate the candor and the level of care that we have in our discussions. Christy.
Thanks so much, Nate. I think that,
Oh, you remuted yourself, Christy.
sorry, I just wanted to say that it's unfortunate that we get in these situations where we feel like we have to shame or blame one another for votes that we've made or, going forward that, all of us that sit on the Board of Education have different walks of life that we bring to that table. I think that that's something that's a part of the creed of being a board member is that you respect one another's opinions and, whether they differ or they're the same. And so I think that I'm hoping that going forward that these difficult conversations that we've had, especially over the last couple of months, that we can refrain from trying to point out those differences, that we just say, okay, we have differences of opinions, and that we hopefully can continue to move forward. Once a board makes a decision, then I think that it is important for us to look at data to make sure that there's accountability. That's a part of the creed of a board member. But I also think that we have to take into consideration the people who are the boots on the ground. So, going forward, and I hope that, the superintendent and Alan can come back to us and let us know what are the next steps, now that these detectors are in the schools. And if the schools do want to go ahead and use them, then what funds are they going to use and what people and what training are going to be, allowed for all of that to happen.
Thank you, Board Member Sweat. That concludes our action agenda. Superintendent, do you have a report tonight?
Just a couple of things to mention. I have an athletics update. This is long overdue, but just to note that the Highland High School boys tennis team took state a few weeks ago, so congratulations to them. And another wonderful movement, I think, is that West High School has received a Bronze Star for sportsmanship. The Utah High School Athletics Association is promoting sportsmanship in a program called Raise the Bar. And West High has completed the first level of the sportsmanship requirements, so wanted to call that out. One of the things I know we're going to work on in this next year is our work around dignity. And Dr. Taylor and others are encouraging our schools to compete with dignity. So I admire that West High is moving in this direction. That's it, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent. Alan, I know we put you on the spot a lot tonight, but do you have a report?
Specifically, I was not able to attend our last RDA subcommittee, but Alan and Christy were, so I was going to ask if either of them had an update for that committee.
Yes, so during that meeting, we had the Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency presented their plans for their next project, which will be funded with as a HTRZ zone, so around mass transit zones, which is funded through tax increment financing. It's at the Rio Grande area, so it's total revitalization of that area through arts and business projects. They're putting the final touches on that plan that will come to the state. I think it's called the State HTRZ Committee. Within the next, I haven't received a date, but since we have two members that sit on that committee, 2 out of, I believe, 12 or 14. So that will go to that committee within the coming months when they finalize their plan. So that was what they reported to us, just showing that. I don't know if any of that's on their website. It is. So yeah, if you go to the Salt Lake City RDA website and search their Rio Grande project, you can see some of that information.
Thank you, Al. Jenny, any board member reports?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Mom?
Well, first of all, it was so wonderful to hear from the speakers today, and I just want to let our LGBTQ plus community, you know, to please feel that they are safe in this district. You know, whatever policies out there might be placed, just want you to know that, you know, that there is a human side that is above those policies. You know, and I'm so sorry that you had to be placed on the pedestal of political games, sadly to say, but continue to plant, you know, a good seed every day. And eventually we will see, you know, a field of good people that will continue to support human rights, no matter what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Bryce?
I don't have anything this week.
Ashley?
I made Alan do it.
Okay. Brian?
I was just going to report that this Friday I will be attending the executive committee meeting of USBA in my capacity there. And I do think that it is nice news that Superintendent Rich Nye was appointed as the Senior Advisor of Education to Governor Cox. I think that this superintendent of the Granite School District will bring a lot of knowledge and will really be an advocate for us with the governor. I think that USBA is happy with that appointment.
Thank you, Brian, for your report. And I don't have a report tonight either, other than just to let the community know that this is our only meeting in July. And so we'll be back in August for our school board meeting then. So I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.